This is your City Council Roundup, a recap of what's happening at City Hall with John Ongaro. The views expressed in this program are solely of those of the host and not necessarily those of the radio station or its partners.
Well, away we go. It's been a while, and here is your first council meeting of 2026. The roundup from last night's meeting got on time, right on time. 6:33 was the start time last night, Danny. With the mayor and all of the councilors in attendance, Councillor Gatuga joining online. And for our first meeting of the year, it was a fairly full agenda with some pretty important decisions. Let's start with a small but interesting planning item. Council dealt with a request from a homeowner on John Street Road who wanted to add what's called a garden suite to their rural property. Basically, it's a small self-contained secondary unit on the same lot as the main house, typically used for family, aging parents, adult kids, that kind of thing. It would be temporary for up to 20 years. City planners said if the proposal fit with the provincial policy, the city's official plan in rural zoning, well, they'll recommend it and approve it. Well, there was one neighbor who raised some concerns, mainly about whether the well and septic system could handle another residence and whether the unit might end up being used as a short-term rental, aka an Airbnb. City staff said those issues get addressed at the building permit stage and that the unit would have to meet all health and safety requirements before anyone could move in. And importantly, it could not just quietly become an Airbnb without violating the permit conditions. Council approved the suite last night, but with a hard deadline. The unit will have to be removed by 2046 unless council approves to extend it in the future.
Let's hope that's on file somewhere.
Somewhere it doesn't lose the document.
At
Yeah.
City Hall.
Next up, council received a presentation from Jamie Taylor, CEO of the Community Economic Development Commission, on the CEDC's new strategic plan. It's a multi-year roadmap aimed at growing Thunder Bay's economy, population, and overall profile. It's built into 5 big pillars: natural resources, workforce and immigration development, tourism development, strengthening the community, and business support. The idea is to guide investment attraction, help local businesses grow, and bring more workers to the region, and position Thunder Bay as both a place to work and a place to visit. There was no vote on it. It was just more about aligning the city priorities with the CADC's plan and what they're already working on. But it sets the tone for a lot of economic development conversations that council will be having coming up this year. Then there was a big staffing decision with the Thunder Bay Fire Services. Councillor authorized the appointment of Dave Torini as acting chief of the Thunder Bay Fire Rescue, replacing Dave Paxton, who is retiring this year. Not any debate on that, but the next item was also Fire Services related. Fire Services asked council to approve a $1 million budget shift between fire truck purchases. It's a simple, I'll break it down simply for you. They wanted to move $1 million from next year's pumper truck budget over to the aerial ladder truck budget so they could pay earlier and qualify for a supplier discount. The ladder truck company was offering a price break if payment happened sooner, and the city estimated that it would save about $90,000 with this move. The important part, no trucks were being canceled or delays. The pumper truck would still be brought in 2027 exactly as planned. The total budget stayed the same, and this was strictly about timing the payment to save money and then shifting the funds back next year.
The ladder truck company is going to give them a discount. I like that.
Well, to pay in advance, I guess.
Yeah, okay.
Council approved all of it, and and frankly, that's one of those behind-the-scenes financial decisions that doesn't get a lot of headlines, but probably should, because saving $90,000 without cutting service is just smart budgeting. There was also a funding item tied to one of the city's most important cultural venues. The council approved up to $93,000 to help the Thunder Bay Community Auditorium pay for engineering studies. Now, the auditorium is city-owned but operated by a nonprofit now, and under the lease agreement, the operator is responsible for maintenance. These engineering reports are needed to properly plan future repairs and renovations, and they're also required if the group wants to apply for senior government funding for bigger upgrades down the road. This money would not come out of taxes or operating budgets. It would come from the auditorium's own capital reserve fund, which was set aside specifically for building repairs and has close to $300,000 in it right now. This issue actually came up during a recent cultural funding review where the group didn't receive extra funding from the city for the engineering group, and then council asked staff to look at another option. That was the option. There was really no discussion. It was approved last night.
I have a question.
Sure.
During the community auditorium discussion, was there any chat about maybe a budget to bring in like Michael McDonald or Peter Cetera or something like that?
Not the city's problem anymore. It's
Okay.
not for profit now.
All right.
Now let's talk about the big one from last night, surplus city lands for housing. This was council taking the next major step toward putting 4 city-owned vacant properties into play for residential development. The sites are Fanshawe Street, Tokyo Street, which, by the way, Danny reminded me, is actually the corner of John Street and Golfling, or John Street and Junot. Yeah. Tupper and Camelot, and Arundel Street. These were selected through a public call for proposals where developers were invited to submit housing concepts. The response was very strong, to say the least, and the top proposals could eventually lead to more than 1,000 new housing units across the 4 sites. 1,000 new units. This is also tied directly to, of course, the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund, which provides funding to cities that move faster on housing approvals. Now, declaring land surplus does not approve final buildings. What it does allow is for the city to start formal negotiations with developers and move into detailed planning. Now, of course, we all know that neighbors raised a lot of concerns about buildings, the height, the traffic, the green space, and privacy. And in response, developers already scaled back some of the proposals, including the Arundel Street project, which dropped from about 600 units to 400. More studies and public meetings are still required, and the 2 sites will need to do some rezoning before anything can be built. Administration estimated that the sale of the land itself on these 4 properties would generate about $2 to $3 million for the city once the properties are sold. But the much bigger impact comes later. The city estimates that roughly $400 million in construction activity and new ongoing property tax revenue of about $1.4 to $2.8 million per year into the city's account, once everything is built and fully assessed, of course. Now, that's ongoing tax base is the big reason the city is pushing these sites for the housing rather than letting them sit vacant. So off to the debate we went. This is where I thought we would be here for hours, but we weren't. Councillor Agarwal asked that each property be voted on separately rather than as one package. That opened the door to a much longer discussion, especially around concerns about the overpass at the expressway, which he had many questions about, and how future traffic infrastructure might affect development, particularly where the Ministry of Transportation's plans were adequate. Now, that whole overpass at John Street is going to take up a little bit of land, but that's our land, not the ministry's land, so she was concerned about that. To some in the room, it sounded a little bit less like a technical planning concern and more like an argument for not moving that site forward. Councillor Chung pushed back on that, calling this one of the most important votes of this term of council, and she is absolutely right, reminding everyone that it's an election year and that voters are watching how serious council is about addressing the housing crisis. At the same time, that brought questions to my mind about how serious this council was about the housing crisis for the homeless and the multiple decisions that were made on that and the split votes that were made on that. We'll tie that all together in a second. There was also a reminder last night during the debate that Thunder Bay is already number 2 in the province for available parkland within the city limits. That's right. In the entire province, Thunder Bay is number 2 for the total amount of available parkland in the city limits. Meaning this isn't about paving over the entire city. It's about using some strategically located vacant land for housing where services already exist. So off to the votes we went. Remember, Councillor Agarwal asked for these to be voted on separately. On Fanshawe Street, unanimous, 13-0. On Tupper and Camelot, again, unanimous, 13-0. On Tokyo Street, John and Junot, Councillor Agarwal, the only one voting no. Everyone else voting yes, 12-1. And then finally on Arundel, the biggest development, once again, Councillor Agarwal voted no, and the rest of council voted yes. So overall, the sale of surplus land was carried, and the city can now move forward into formal negotiations and detailed planning with the developer. That's it. That's where it wrapped up. About 2.5 hours in, council adjourned last night at 9:07. To sum it all up, green light for a rural garden suite, a new acting fire chief. Smart budget timing saves money on fire trucks. Engineering studies move forward to the community auditorium, and the biggest step yet towards unlocking over 1,000 new housing units on city-owned land approved last night. And heading into an election year, that last vote is going to be one that a lot of people, especially those in Current River, are going to remember. And that's your roundup for this week.
Thanks, John. That surplus land, this concept from these 4 properties, this is very aggressive. You throw out some really interesting numbers, especially when the tax base comes.
2.8 million a year. Now, let me remind you, there are two major developments going on Golf Links Road, right?
Exactly.
So Costco and then the big development with the McDonald's on the corner.
Sorry, did you say what?
It's Costco. Somebody just say it out loud. But that's $3 million-ish, $2 to $3 million. We're talking about $5 million more revenue on just a couple of properties. If you don't think Thunder Bay is growing, it certainly is. And that money means a lot to the city and how we operate and how we do things.
Well said. And it sounds like everyone got along last night.
Unanimous votes, unheard of. I completely expected a very long-winded debate about those properties because there are so many people that are vocal about those properties. And I also want to point out that when I was going through all of these documents, especially about those properties, there were some results from the Get Involved surveys that were sent out. Mm-hmm. I just want to touch on that quickly.
Sure.
The survey said this: when asked how important it is for the city to support infill development considering Thunder Bay's housing shortage, participants responded that 43% said very important, 24% said important. So that's 67%. Mm-hmm. So people all agree that housing shortage is a big deal. Now, when asked how they support the conceptual development of each of the sites, that made for some interesting math too. Tokyo Street, 35% in support, or very supportive, and 25% supportive. So there's another 60% in favor, okay? Yeah. Tupper and Camelot Street, 40% very supportive, 25% supportive. There's another 65.
Yep.
Fanshawe, very supportive, 34%, supportive, 24%. Okay, so now you see where I'm going with this? Another 60%. Arundel, not supportive, 34.5%, but I'm a math guy.
Yep.
29% were very supportive, and just under supportive was 20%. That's 50%. Over 50% were supportive of Arundel Street. Now, it seems like that's how council voted, too. They went with what this survey did. Now, there's a lot of people that are going to be very unhappy about the Arundel Street one, but your council followed. That's why these surveys that are online about getting involved and talking to your councilors, these surveys matter.
Yeah, make sure you participate in those.
That's right.
The Arundel property seemed to be the most vocal out of all of them.
Well, because of the amount of units,
yes,
right? And it did come down from 600 to 400. But I don't know if anybody saw the conceptual drawings. It's on the city website. You can go to them. Yeah. These buildings are beautiful. Now, they're just concepts.
Yeah.
But the idea of them are beautiful, and the housing is needed. Now, last thing I'm going to say about this, and I watched this debate unfold on Facebook last night because, that's where all the good debates
problems,
happen.
Yeah.
Everybody is talking about how it's changing neighborhoods, whatever else, but there was a big discussion about how expensive these apartments will be. Look at it this way. John Collins, city manager, said it best last night. It's a supply and demand thing. We don't have enough apartments. When there is enough apartments, the prices will come down or they will freeze. But people are saying these are going to be $1,600 to $2,000 apartments. Who can afford that? Well, who can afford that are the people that are in the cheaper apartments that can move into those ones, thereby making more cheaper apartments available. You see what happens is that you're going to move to a newer place. That's going to make other properties available. So eventually it'll work itself out.
I see what you mean.
But it absolutely is a supply and demand situation, and we don't have a lot of supply. But 1,000 new units, that sure puts us on target real fast.
What an aggressive plan. There you have it. That is the first City Council roundup of the year. Another reminder, you can get this full recap at yourthunderbay.ca. Thanks, John.
Thank you.